The primary function of the urinary system is to maintain the concentration of the blood plasma and fluid surrounding each cell. Waste's excess solutes and water are removed by the kidneys and transported through ureters to the urinary bladder, where they remain until released from the body through the urethra. The nephron, the functional unit of the kidney, is a U-shaped microscopic tube that begins at the renal corpuscle, where blood interfaces with the renal tubule and ends by draining into a collecting duct. Between the tubular nephron and its blood vessels, three functions occur: glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion. Glomerular filtration is the passing of filtrate through the glomerular capillaries into the glomerular capsule. The walls of the glomerular capillaries are filled with small pores called fenestrations. Fenestrations are surrounded by negative charges that repel passage of negatively charged proteins. Podocytes, octopus-like cells with processes that wrap around the glomerular capillaries, form filtration slits. Plasma and solutes, excluding most proteins, pass into the glomerular capsule through these openings. The glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, is the speed at which filtrate passes through the glomerular capillaries into the glomerular capsule. GFR is controlled by a process called renal autoregulation and contributes to maintenance of plasma concentration and removal of wastes. If the GFR is too slow, too much is reabsorbed and plasma becomes too concentrated. Excessively high GFR doesn't allow time to reabsorb sufficient solutes back into the bloodstream. A constant GFR requires a stable glomerular pressure. The myogenic mechanism contributes to this stability. When increased blood pressure causes renal, arteriolar smooth muscle to stretch, automatic constriction of this smooth muscle will result because of this mechanism. When systemic blood pressure is low, the same muscle relaxes to maintain a constant GFR. GFR can also be adjusted by tubuloglomerular feedback. Within the wall of the distal convoluted tubule is the macula densa. These cells detect the flow of filtrate through the nephron by monitoring sodium and chloride ions and water passing by. The cells secrete paracrines to adjust the diameter of the afferent arteriole and control glomerular pressure. If the flow is too slow, the afferent arteriole relaxes, increasing pressure in the glomerulus and increasing GFR and flow through the nephron. When filtrate from the renal corpuscle flows into the proximal convoluted tubule, tubular reabsorption separates the needed concentrations of substances from their excess and from metabolic wastes. Unneeded substances pass out of the body in the urine. Tubular reabsorption. The return of most water and filtered solutes to the bloodstream involves both passive and active processes. Urea and most ions passively diffuse from the proximal convoluted tubule into the interstitial fluid, then onto the peritubular capillaries. The reabsorption of other solutes requires energy-consuming primary or secondary active transport. Primary active transport uses energy derived from the hydrolysis of ATP to drive pumps which transport substances against their concentration gradient. Secondary active transport uses the energy stored in an ion's electromechanical gradient instead of ATP. As one substance, such as sodium ions, moves down its concentration gradient, it pushes another substance against its gradient. Symporters move two or more substances in the same direction across the membrane. Antiporters move two or more substances in opposite directions across the membrane. Osmosis passively draws water out of the proximal convoluted tubule and descending limb of the nephron loop into the peritubular capillaries. The ascending limb of the nephron loop is impermeable to water, but actively pumps sodium and chloride ions into the interstitial fluid. The resulting buildup of salt surrounding the nephron loop draws about 80% of the water from the descending limb into the interstitial fluid and into the capillaries, regulating fluid volume and osmolarity. This process of water following the solutes is known as obligatory water reabsorption. Some nephron loops extend deeply into the renal pyramids, allowing a process known as countercurrent multiplication to take place. Countercurrent multiplication forms and maintains a vertical osmotic gradient which allows additional water to be reabsorbed from the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct. This controls plasma osmotic pressure and concentrates urine. Hormonal control of water retention also occurs in the nephron. Extracellular osmotic pressure is regulated by the presence or absence of antidiuretic hormone, ADH. When the blood plasma becomes too concentrated, release of ADH signals the formation of water channels in the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct, allowing the kidneys to reabsorb additional water back into the bloodstream. When ADH is not present, excess water is excreted from the body as dilute urine. Blood pressure and volume are also affected by the kidneys. If receptors in the afferent arteriole sense that blood pressure is low, the juxtaglomerular apparatus releases an enzymatic hormone called renin. The lungs respond to the release of renin by producing an activating enzyme which results in formation of angiotensin II in the bloodstream. Angiotensin II causes blood vessels to constrict, increasing blood pressure, and stimulates the adrenal glands to release the hormone aldosterone, which also causes an increase in plasma volume and consequent blood pressure. Aldosterone causes greater plasma volume because it increases active transport of sodium and chloride ions into the interstitial fluid. Combined with the production of ADH, the additional reabsorption of sodium and chloride ions causes more water to be drawn into the bloodstream by osmosis, resulting in increased blood volume. Tubular secretion is the transfer of materials from the peritubular capillaries and tubular cells into the tubular fluid for excretion as urine. Hydrogen and potassium ions, as well as other chemicals, drugs, and food additives that need to be removed from the body are transported from the peritubular capillaries into the renal tubule and secreted into the urine. The major functions of the nephron, glomerular filtration, tubular reabsorption, and tubular secretion, enable your kidneys to maintain solutes and water concentrations, assist in the regulation of blood pressure and blood volume, and remove excess substances and wastes from your body.